I'd like to address a little bit about police officers' roles in going out on domestic violence calls. According to the national statistics, it's number 12 down the line for danger to police officers. However, it's absolutely true. They never know what they're going to be finding when they go to a house and they knock on the door or they enter a house where violence is an issue. Frequently what happens, and is happening frequently here in our community, is dual arrest. And dual arrest is, as our judges told us last week, is a futile effort because there's absolutely nothing that can be done with that. Once you've done a dual arrest, it's a useless effort for the court system, so all they can do is dismiss it. Dual arrest has a lot of impact down the road too, in terms of impact on victims. You mentioned the immigrant victims. What happens, and I'm seeing this a lot here with our Hispanic victims as well as others, African American and white victims. If a victim, often victims are being arrested too and sent to jail. Just a couple of days ago was a picture of a victim who had been severely beaten around the face. She was on the just busted, you can see, but she was arrested for domestic violence. This is not uncommon that victims get arrested. What happens with these cases is that the victim is re-victimized by the very system that should be there to protect them. And the long-term effect of this is that victims then have an arrest. They're booked in the jail, they're fingerprinted, they end up in court with charges, and these are a permanent part of their record unless they're fortunate enough to be able to have a very expensive attorney who may or may not be able to get those charges expunged. After they're booked, it's part of permanent record. If you are fingerprinted in the jail, you can't expunge that. So what you've done is impair that big victim's ability to find a job. It's on her record. So she then is being victimized again. And this is very serious because this is going to be there from now on. And I'm seeing this happen a lot. So we need to look at what we're doing in terms of impact on those who are actually involved in this.
Absolutely, because if you claim you've been assaulted, then the other person can also file charges of being assaulted. And
well,
it's a wash, but like you said, it's on the record.
One of our big issues is the failure to train our police officers adequately to be able to determine the difference between defensive injuries and offensive injuries. If a person, I say this medically, a person who's laying on the slab in the morgue, we can tell whether their injuries were offensive or defensive if they're laying there dead. We can also do that if they're living. We don't have to wait for someone to die to be able to discern the type of injuries you get. If you're trying to defend yourself, the victim who's beaten around the face is going to automatically put her hands up to protect her face. I mean, that's just, and I say her, he will too. So we need to be training our police officers. We need forensics training for our police officers, and then we need someone at the very top to say we will do evidence-based investigation of these cases that does not require the testimony of victims. I went through this last week, that when we ask a victim to press charges against her perpetrator, this is the only crime where the victim goes home to live with the perpetrator. If you ask her to do that, you've asked her to put a target on her chest. She is going to become his target for all of his violence, and he's going to be madder than ever if he gets arrested and taken to jail. When he comes out, he's really going to be upset and hard to get along with. So we need to take the burden from the victim and put it on the state. It needs to be a case that is the state versus the perpetrator, just like murder cases are. We try murder cases every day without the victim testifying. So we need to be able to do that with domestic violence cases. It just means that we have to take them seriously, and we have to expect from our law enforcement officers what they need to be doing, and that's investigation. Everything depends. You can't prosecute a case if you don't have the investigation to back it up. So we need good investigations, and we need police officers who are well trained in that
area. And they can also read, because I was involved where the perpetrator wrote in his own statement that he assaulted her first. And the officer ended up arresting the victim, even though in his own words he said.
I think that's where some of that bias comes in as well.
We have a lot of very subliminal, barely below the surface bias. We still are very reluctant to hold offenders accountable for their behavior. We do not want to admit that we have the problem we have with violence in families. People are very reluctant even to discuss this. I find this with clergy, with healthcare professionals, with people from all walks. So that's one of the reasons we don't look at this the same way we look at child abuse or elder abuse, but it's really a continuum of the same problem. Abuse occurs throughout life, from before birth all the way through death. And the adult abuse is the only part of the abuse cycle that does not require mandated reporting. Part of that is because we don't have anybody to report it to who knows what to do about it. And we need to train our officers so that they have, if it's reported to them, what are you going to do? We need a plan for how to deal with that. We don't have it. So we've got a lot of work to do, and a lot of education, and a lot of just changing the hearts and minds of men.
I think that's a good point, though, because, you know, it's different with child abuse, for example, because you can bring, in terms of training police officers, giving them additional training on top of the training they already have in domestic violence, it's important, but it's different with child abuse, right? Because if a child abuse situation comes, they get a little training. They don't have to be fully trained in it because the DCS worker will come in. There's an agency, there's an department set up that you're assuming the person who comes knows how to deal with that specifically. They know the laws, they know how to respond to it, those sorts of things. With domestic violence, it's very, very different, because if a police officer is even trained in how to deal with a domestic violence situation, how to de-escalate it, how to remove the person who's done the assault, etc., what's the next step? I mean, you arrest them, right? But the victim is left. Right? And you may take her to the hospital or take him to the hospital, but in terms of addressing the core of the problem with the child abuse case, you can remove the child, you can bring in additional services, you know, you can place the child temporarily in another home. But with domestic violence cases, there's not that next step to really take the next step to resolve the issue, you know, as a whole, for the victim and also for the offender. And I think that's where you have a lot of police officers who like you said, do great work every day, but aren't prepared and aren't equipped with the tools to be able to actually do what's necessary. Even if they're trained in how to de-escalate a situation instead of saying go around the block, know how to deal with it, there's no next step to resolve the situation in the home.